Welcome to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet. Breathe, eat, sleep, thrive in every aspect of your life. What does thriving actually mean? Thriving is not a word, it's an action, a way of living. And that's what the Best Living Show is all about. So get ready, step into a new narrative, and find a new way of being. There's a beautiful connection, a spark that flies at the intersection between the genetic code and your internal guidance system. We're going to throw away the culture that would tell us that thriving is something only for a few. Every one of us is unique. It's our time to discover why. The Best Living Show starts now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet, and we have a great show tonight. We have talked before about longevity and what that means. But since the time of Ponce de Leon, people have been looking for the fountain of youth. And, the statistics are pretty, or the math, if you like, is pretty good on this. If we could just increase our life expectancy by 1 year, healthcare costs, we could save 250 billion. If we could increase our life expectancy by 10 years, it's in the trillions. It's amazing. And so I'm happy to welcome to the show tonight Hannah Went. She has a lifelong passion for longevity and also breakthrough disruptive technologies that really drive radical improvement in the human condition. She attended the University of Kentucky and graduated with a degree in biology. During that time, she had multiple research internships studying cell signaling and cell biology. And after graduation, she worked for the International Peptide Society as a director of research and content. And through all of this amazing history in integrative medicine, she saw an opportunity to work with methylation-based age diagnostics. And so in 2020, started with TruDiagnostics. And TruDiagnostics is a company that's been focusing on methylation array-based diagnostics for life extension and preventative healthcare serving functional medicine providers. I've taken this test. It's very, very interesting. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we talk about TruDiagnostic, who is committed to research and is involved, has 30 approved clinical trials investigating epigenetic methylation, changes in longevity, health interventions. We will talk about what all of this means. But really, since the inception of TruDiagnostic, they have created one of the largest private epigenetic health databases in the world with over 15,000 patients tested, and I'm in that database somewhere. And since Hannah has been doing all of this and is such a knowledge on epigenetics and methylation, she also started podcasts. So she's a fellow podcaster and has that on her YouTube channel and has different scientists and epigenetic coaches on talking about what epigenetics can do for you. And that is called Everything Epigenetics. And so you can certainly check out Hannah's podcast as well. But tonight we are going to talk all about longevity and aging and what TruDiagnostic does. So welcome to the show, Hannah.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Sweet. I appreciate that introduction. I'm super excited to chat with you tonight and discuss longevity, all things epigenetics, and anything age related as well. So excited to get into it.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of people talk about this, and I know, like, I had Liz Parrish on the show just a little while ago when we talked about obviously the biggest risk factor for, as anything is aging, right? For chronic disease and death. And we kind of talked about those hallmarks of aging. And this is really what, where TruDiagnostic comes in, because you're saying, like, how do we kind of stop that, slow that process down, right? So why does this matter? Why do we want to know about it? I know I wanted to know, but why do other people want to know about this?
Yeah, I'm one of those people as well who wants to know everything about myself, right? And I know there's some people who don't want to know anything about
Yeah,
themselves. So
yeah.
depends on who you are, what side of the teeter totter you're on, I guess. But just like you said, in echoing that, aging is the number one risk factor for most chronic disease and death. It's something that we've known for a very long time. It's something that's been studied for a very long time. there's a really nice graphical representation of this as well. And I can send it to you if you want to send it out to your listeners. But it looks at the top 3 causes of death in the US in 2020. And it's heart disease, COVID-19, and cancer. And I think there's a
Right.
4th one that's dementia, Alzheimer's as well. And if you look at the risk factors for every single one of those categories I just mentioned, aging trumps every other risk factor like obesity or some other outcomes as well. So we really start to see aging as this kind of primary issue, and then everything else is secondary. So any disease outcome, heart disease, any type of phenotypic outcome as well from that disease is going to be a result of aging. So if we can measure this process, we can mitigate it, we can reverse a lot of those outcomes, and therefore, reverse your risk. So I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when I first kind of heard about this concept that, aging was like your biggest risk factor for disease, I was kind of like, oh, I was taken aback, right? Like,
Mhm.
wait, does this make sense to me? Because, you tend to think about like, well, I'm going to, die with something, right? Like, I might get cancer, I might get heart disease, but you don't think that you're going to die from aging, right? It's
Right.
not what you first think. So it is kind of a different way to look at it. And when I, when we looked at when I was talking with Liz, and she was saying like, well, if we took cancer off the table, you
Mhm.
might get another 7 years, but then heart disease might take over, so that's the thing. Like anytime we try and take something off the table as we advance in age, there's another factor that will come into it. And so it's a little different way to look at things. And for me, it was kind of like, oh, you know, like
Yeah.
that kind of aha moment.
Exactly. There's always another outcome that'll result of aging as well. I would say something that's very controversial in this space right now, or I always like hearing key opinion leaders about if aging should be considered a disease or not. Right.
Right,
Some
right,
people say yes. Some people say no. I get both sides of the argument. I understand why some people want to say no because they think disease has a negative connotation and they don't.
right.
Aging is graceful. We become more wise. We go through all of these
Yeah,
lifetime experiences. So I totally get that point of view. On the other hand, if we want to start making some of these biological age tests reimbursable by insurance, or we
yeah,
want to gather a lot of funding from
yeah,
from a research perspective on aging, which is an absolute need, then having aging being classified as a disease would actually help those causes. But I don't know where I land. I see
yeah,
both
yeah.
arguments.
I can see what you're saying now, because I mean, most of the time when we classify something, it is usually for like we're trying to get grant funding, or as you say, insurance to cover these things. So there is a method to the madness. But I
Hmm.
totally agree. And I think there's been a big push over the last few years to not see aging as something that is negative. That this is the rite of passage for our lives, right? We as we go around the sun, we get a year older, but that doesn't mean that we have to die of these chronic diseases, that we can, maybe mitigate them, hold them off as long as possible so that we can enjoy that fountain of youth, right? That
Yeah.
most is looking for.
Yeah,
And I
definitely.
think as technology advances, as our understanding advances, I'm seeing like even the amount of clinical trials for different molecules and different things to aid in this process. It's
Hmm.
it's astounding what is going on right now in this space.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think it's really interesting when I'm doing a lot of these report reviews with my healthcare providers as well. I'm claiming the title as the most report reviews ever done in the world as it comes to this epigenetic methylation testing, at least of course with the TruDiagnostic test that is. But all that being said, when I'm doing these report reviews, we have a very specific cohort. And my bio, maybe I need to update it. Actually, we've actually ran closer to now 25,000 samples since
Wow.
I've wrote
Wow.
that. So I need to update
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah, absolutely.
that being said, a lot of these report reviews I'm doing, since we are testing a really healthy population, people who are
Mm,
really trying to be optimal, a reoccurring theme is that they'll say to me, I may be older now, I may be 50, 60, or 70 chronologically, but I feel the best I've ever had in my entire life because I'm
Mhm.
now taking, I'm in control. I know my DNA is not my destiny, food is medicine, all of those kind of cliche sayings that we're hearing online and seeing on
Yeah.
social
Yeah.
media. Those things are true, right? As
Right.
it applies to aging and longevity. So I really like that. I think it's super powerful because again, you're in the driver's seat. You're no longer kind of in the passenger side watching your life go by. You're taking control and you're able to really change the expression of your genes, thus lower a lot of those age related outcomes.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, like, I mean, I did mine obviously to have that knowledge. So I could see what my pace of aging was,
Hmm.
and what, my age was. And, there's so much in that report, obviously, and we'll go into a little bit about that. But yeah, it does give you, as you say, the power then to take your destiny into your own hands and modify that. And
Hmm.
I know there are people that are making big changes by doing this, and some of it is easy modification, as you said, like food is medicine. Like what do we got on the end of our fork that can really make an impact on that aging rate?
Yeah.
Or actually, some of the studies saying less eating, right? The calorie
Hmm.
restriction idea, that, is that something that would work for me? And so being able to look at that, and then this is one of the tests that we can actually retest and
Hmm.
see, right, where how we're doing. It really does now say, you can say to yourself, I'm in control, I'm in the driver's seat, and I'm going to do the best I can. And it's not something to be afraid of. I think a lot of times people who don't want to know, right, they're
Uh-huh.
afraid of what that might mean, right? What am
Yeah.
I going to find out? And maybe that's a bit scary, but it doesn't have to be, right?
Exactly. And I think these types of results as well just reinforce positive behavior. Right? You don't really know
Right.
how someone is aging biologically from the outside. I mean, phenotypically, we can maybe guess a little bit, but you don't know all of those individual markers that we offer, intrinsic, extrinsic, immune cell deconvolution methods, pace of aging, telomere length. There's all these ways that we're aging from a biological standpoint, but being able to quantify that and again give you the power and see it on paper, it's something that we can basically touch, we recognize, and we say, oh wow, that's really good, or oh wow, maybe I should change some of my lifestyle habits.
Right.
um
Right.
just while we're on this topic too, I had one of the best case studies a couple weeks ago where someone tested with us like right when we opened back in kind of July of 2020. We're 3 years old this month, which is crazy to say as
Wow.
well. Yeah, but he retested recently, and his wife is actually an NP, and he made drastic lifestyle changes. I'm not saying he did anything crazy like any procedural based things like stem cells, exosomes, or hyperbaric or whatnot, but he just made drastic lifestyle changes, and I saw all of his markers get better. I'm like begging them to try and do a case study for me, or put it on a webinar or whatever,
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
just
We need to know,
proves.
like, what are some of these things that worked? I mean, granted, we know that each person is individual, their epigenetics is individual. Um, but there is a lot of data to show a lot of interventions will work for people, right? And
Mhm.
so, hey, let's share and find out what what those are. So
Yeah.
you mentioned before, as you were talking about that, and extrinsic age and intrinsic age.
Mhm.
So we know what chronological age is, right? So
Mhm.
this is, as I said, every time we go around the sun, we age 1 year, and we have birthdays, and that's what's our age, as we, when people ask how old are you. But what does it mean for extrinsic and intrinsic age? What does that mean?
Yeah, this is super important. And maybe goes a little bit more into the science as well. But when we talk about your true age, which is kind of how we brand our testing, your pure aging signal, your fundamental baseline aging process, that's going to be your intrinsic epigenetic age. So if someone's doing our testing and you're you're really excited and you're telling someone about your biological age, you would say, my biological age is, and then you would insert that intrinsic epigenetic age. All right. So that's kind of this overarching aging signal. The extrinsic age, on the other hand, is what makes it a little bit more confusing, but it's going to actually be the age of your immune system. So it's looking at how your immune cell subsets are changing as you become older chronologically. So it's taking those immune cell subset counts into effect, because we know those are going to change as we become older chronologically.
Okay, right. So now, when I did mine, I think like the extrinsic age was not that much different, but the immune age, the intrinsic was a little bit different. Why would those be different?
Yeah, so if we think of aging from more of a philosophical standpoint, right? We have millions, but probably billions of cells in our body. And each of these cells are going to have a different epigenetic clock, or they're going to tick in a different way. So the intrinsic and extrinsic epigenetic aging, and the reason we offer a lot of these different outcomes is because we are going to age differently according to different metrics in our body. So
Mhm.
intrinsic is not discriminating based on cell type, tissue type, organ type. Again, it's kind of including everything and saying on
Right.
average, this is how old your biological age is. Where the extrinsic says, wait a second, we know your immune cell subsets are important. We get more, I would say, more senescent cells, more of those zombie cells as we age chronologically. We get less differentiated cells. We get more natural killer cells, even those become less effective as we age. So those immune cell subsets are always changing in the blood. And for the extrinsic, we need to be able to account for those changes as well. So
Yeah.
it's really two different ways that we're aging, and we're able to quantify that.
And I know, like when I talked to you about my true age, you also said that you're like looking to expand that, right, to all the different organs and how they're aging. I think you had said that that's something that you're looking at.
Yeah, definitely. We have a really exciting study we're about to publish too, where we're creating a multi-omic clock essentially that's going to be even beat our intrinsic and extrinsic epigenetic aging. I don't know if I've ever spoken about it on a podcast yet that's been,
Ooh.
released. So, yeah, no, it's super exciting. And then hopefully we'll have those organ system ages too, by the end of the year, I think. But that Harvard
Wow.
study will be the most validated biological age commercially available to date, and beats out, I would say, everything that's available. We're basically beating ourselves because we never want to settle, and want to hold
Of
ourselves to the
course. Yeah.
highest levels. Hmm.
That's great. I'm going to be excited to get an update on that myself, just to see that. Just because as you say, there's some people that love to quantify everything. I'm one of those people. Like I want to know like all of these things. So I definitely am excited about that. Well, we've come to our first break, so we're going to take a break now, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. And when we get back, we're going to talk about methylation patterns and how that is associated with your true age and why it is important to test your epigenetic age. We're going to talk about how accurate this is as far as the testing, things that people would want to know when they're thinking about getting this done. All right, we'll see you in a few minutes. Hello, and welcome back to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet, and we've been talking with Hannah Went from TruDiagnostics and Everything Epigenetics, all about longevity and aging, and how, well, we will talk later about how we can start to reverse some of these markers. But what I want to get down to right now is a little bit of what is epigenetic methylation. We're going to get a little bit into the science here, so bear with us. And what is it that this true age, there it is, the test. I'm trying to like get it in my focus here. No, well, it's there. I'll get it there. There we go. What does this do for us? And why is it important to test? And what is it accurate? And is the precision that we're getting with this, what is it telling us? There's a lot there to unpack in this little box. So let's
Yeah.
start with some of the science behind it, and talk about what is it that we can understand from it and why it's important.
Yeah. Oh gosh. So many things to understand from epigenetic methylation. So let me talk big picture again, because I
Okay.
think when people hear biological age, they don't necessarily think of epigenetic methylation, right? But I think when people hear epigenetic methylation, they think of biological age. Um,
Okay.
and we would be doing ourselves a huge disservice if we only said we could measure biological age through epigenetic methylation testing. It is predicted by experts in the field that epigenetic methylation testing will overtake conventional blood testing, hormone panel testing, probably about 60 to 70% of testing that conventional medical
Wow.
doctors do in the next
Wow.
decade or two, because this field moves relatively slow, right? But I just think that is so exciting, really. Epigenetics acts as a good proxy for almost anything else, as long as we have the data behind it and we're able to
Right.
make the predictor using, machine learning and artificial intelligence. So, some of the new reports that TruDiagnostic is releasing within the next couple of months are going to be a DNA methylation, CRP, and IL-6 predictor. Um,
Okay.
Even a fitness report where we can even tell you your DNA methylation, VO2 max, grip strength, gait speed, FEV1. So you're starting to get into this more general biomarker world, right? So I really encourage everyone to think of epigenetics or DNA methylation as just a biomarker. That's really all it is. If you remember way back in the day when we would get a blood test done, we would only have cholesterol. Now we
Right.
have HDL and LDL, right? Now we have
Right.
particle size of HDL and LDL.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it doesn't mean that the first one was wrong. It just means now we have better what's the word I want to use? Like better clarity or insight, right? Um,
Mhm.
Same with epigenetics, and we're really getting there with all of those new report offerings that I just mentioned too.
Yeah, and some of the things that you mentioned grip strength, IL-6,
Hmm.
those are all indicators, right, or have correlations with your outcomes for health and aging. So what you're saying is then with this methylation test, we can start to really look at those indicators in a more precise way.
Exactly right. Yeah, you're going to, say for example, you get your fitness score back, and it shows that based on your epigenetic methylation, you have a pretty weak grip strength. So maybe that would drive again behaviors for you to practice getting a stronger grip strength, right? And that's a really simple example. It might sound a little bit silly, but a stronger grip strength is going to be related to better aging outcomes. So maybe it is, going to the gym and holding yourself on a pull-up bar, right? Until you can't let go anymore. Or, there's different exercises and things you can do as well to increase grip strength. But again, as kind of a silly example, and as weird as that might sound, it really is going to be correlated with a longer um, life. So lifespan, and then better quality life as well, being health span.
Right, because obviously a lot of these, what we're looking at, a lot of these things, not only are they linked to the chronic diseases we talked about earlier, but also just movement and mobility, right? Because when you talk about VO2 max, you're talking about what is it that oxygen can come into our body, what are we
Hmm.
carrying throughout our body, how is that feeding our brain, our cells, grip strength. Obviously, we know that as we get older, like if we don't have that grip strength, we can't open things, we can't hold on to things, we can't pick up things as easy. So this is, really where those connections are made. And as you say, like there's so many easy things like for grip strength to do to try and really improve on that.
Hmm.
And going to the gym being one of them, resistance training.
Hmm.
And really, I say to people, a lot of times you're doing this not for yourself now, but for your 80-year-old self, right? So
Yeah.
that you have that longevity of movement, of ability, and what is it that your quality of life, what is it that you want it to be when you're 80? So that's really right what we're looking at here when we're testing is,
Definitely.
where am I now and where do I want to be when I'm 80, and what can I do to preserve what I have now as much as possible.
Definitely. And I couldn't agree more. I always say, I don't want to live until I'm 100 if I can't walk to the bathroom when I'm 80 or walk my dog, right? I love being active.
Right.
Hopefully having grandchildren one day, or, being able to start a new business when I'm 80 years old if I wanted to. So when people usually take this test, I really encourage them to ask themselves why, right? Why do I care? Why am I taking this test? Do you have a reason that you want to increase not only, again, how long you're living, that lifespan, but the quality of life as well? Because that's really what it's all about. In between our 40s and 60s, our disease diagnosis exponentially increases. I mean, just really straight up in terms of kind of that slope. So even if we can take, again, more of a preventative approach and test as young as possible and identify if we're aging at an accelerated rate as early as possible, we can again make those lifestyle adjustments, supplement medication additions, or if it's in your kind of plans, more of a procedural based therapy to mitigate those effects and slow that down. So yeah, I always encourage people to ask their why as well. You're taking the test, you really do care, you want to learn these metrics and learn a little bit more from it.
Yeah, and I think that's really the why it's important to know these things, right? Because what we don't measure, right, we can't affect in any way. And so, knowing these different factors, I mean, I think that the test looks at multiple things, and then, it's going to be looking at even more factors as well. But yeah, it's really the only way that we're going to be able to quantify and make that difference for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think going back to that DNA methylation CRP marker is a good example. The DNA methylation CRP and IL-6 that we'll be reporting out on will not replace your traditional IL-6 and CRP. I want to make that very clear. Not yet, but it will be as we train it a little bit further. What it's able to do, and I'll just choose CRP as the example, is it's able to give more of like an HbA1c of CRP instead of
Okay.
your kind of blood-based value of CRP where it's a moment in time. That could be increased due to a different sickness or how you're
Right.
feeling that day.
Right.
So the DNA methylation CRP, and again, CRP is C-reactive protein. It's not a what am I trying? It's not a specific. It's an unspecific inflammatory marker, I should say.
Right.
So the
Yep.
higher CRP you have, the worse inflammation, the worse outcomes that you're having. So you're sick if it's increased. So what the DNA methylation does, since epigenetics and these markers are fairly stable over like month to month time points, it's able to give you
Hmm.
like a 3-month running average of your
Okay.
CRP.
All
So it's
right.
more like almost like a 3-month stamp across your methylome, which is actually more related to outcomes than your traditional CRP
Mm,
metrics. And
right.
that's what we keep finding are these correlations and these hidden gems. And again, maybe going more toward the logistics, why this is becoming so revolutionary, and we're truly undergoing an epigenetics revolution, is it's going to be very cheap, right? Where the
Yep.
costs are going to be the same, the turnaround time is going to be very quick, and it is just a very small blood spot card sample.
Right.
So
Right.
when you put it that way, it seems, I think, a lot more feasible rather than going to, 5 different places, getting your blood drawn, paying for, a copay here and insurance here, and it just being a headache, right? We want to make
Yeah.
life easier for people.
Yeah. I mean, I think about it, exactly what you just said. So, I go to have blood work done every 6 months or so, right, to see kind of what's going on. Again,
Mhm.
for me, that's an important thing to know, like what's going on, because my body doesn't have any gauges on it that that I can see that tell
Right.
me what's going on. So I have to look at the blood. And sometimes when I get these blood draws done, I don't know, it's like they're taking 14 vials of blood, right, for all the different markers. So you're looking at, as you say, cholesterol, and and all the different particles within that, and we're looking at glucose and insulin, and we're looking at ferritin and different vitamins and all of these things. And then I come to TruAge to have look at my methylation marker, and it's literally like this tiny spot of blood that I put on and send it in,
Right.
and it gives me this wealth of information. So it is amazing. So how
Yeah.
how accurate is that tiny spot of blood that I'm giving you versus me giving half of my my blood away for the
Yeah.
lab?
Yeah. And I'll be honest as well. I'm due for to go to Quest or LabCorp, and I'm putting it off because I don't want to fast. It takes too much time. But that's a reminder. I need to schedule that soon, because I do do it every 6 months as well. But instead of asking about the accuracy, we don't want these tests to be accurate. And I'll tell you
Okay.
why.
Okay. That's
More,
interesting.
yeah, we want them to be precise. I'll lead with that. We want
Okay.
them to be precise. So, if you were being accurate with these clocks, that would mean how close can we get it to your chronological age, right? A known
Ah,
number. And we don't want that. We do not want to
no.
tell you your chronological
Okay.
age, because we already
Right.
know that. So yeah, we reframe that question and say, wait a second, how do we make this as replicable, as precise as possible, right? And basically, how we measure that with epigenetics is with an ICC value, is what it's called, and that's called an intra-class correlation value. Meaning, if you take two samples at the same exact time, how highly correlated are they to one another? And in a perfect bubble world, they should be the exact same. I will tell you right now, they will never be the exact same, because of the air quality, because of the way you ship it, because of the lab technician who does it, right? There's all these minuscule parts within the
Right.
process that add up just a teeny bit. However, we have some normalization and some pre-processing methods to control for that. That is why we love bioinformatics. And we are able to get these metrics very, very precise. So TruDiagnostic doesn't use any algorithms unless we have an ICC value of above 0.96. And that's considered excellent. So some of the older algorithms that were first developed had really low precision with ICC values around 0.5 or 0.6, which would be considered fairly poor, not great. Where the older tests could vary by up to, 5 to 7 years within the same sample. And meaning you would have to wait 5 years to take your sample again. And of course, that is not feasible. We need this to be
Right.
actionable for clinical outcomes and values. To be able to deliver this and then have people make a change. So
Right.
we've really come a long way with increasing that precision over time with the algorithms we have available.
Right. And then, you mentioned earlier, and this is something that obviously is another area that's really starting to explode is AI. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
how is AI going to really impact this as far as, future of methylation, accuracy,
Yeah.
information?
Yeah.
Will it give us, you think?
To be quite honest, this is something and by we, I mean TruDiagnostic, our company, probably haven't done a true deep dive into, in terms of everything AI can do, because AI can do a lot of things.
Right.
What we have really excelled at, though, is with the artificial intelligence and creating these algorithms and these predictors, right? So for our Harvard trial that we just did, we tested 5,000 of their biobank samples and looked at 8,000 different untargeted proteomic analyses alongside of their, million epigenetic methylation markers we test, with their full genome, with a metabolomic profile of, I think, around 1,000 different metabolites. And then a little bit of transcriptomics and some phenomic outcomes as well, with their clinical lab values throughout their entire lifetime. So as you could imagine, that is a
A
lot
lot of
of
data.
data.
Yeah.
And that being said, these models, these AI models, are going to pick out which data is most representative of that underlying biological aging. So we're using more of, I would say, the algorithm creation in terms of AI, saying, hey, tell us which positions are responsible for this outcome, right? So I would say that is how it's expanding our world, and we'll definitely continue to do so.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think it's, well, we don't even really know what the limits of, or the unlimited list, I guess, of what AI is going to do for us within epigenetics. I'm excited to see, where this all goes.
Mhm.
We're going to be coming up for another break here soon, but before we go on a break, Hannah, if people really want to know, well, okay, I want to know more about this. How can I get this testing? How do I reach
Yeah.
Hannah and find out more about this? Where do they go to find you?
I'd love to talk to anyone, first off. So please, even reach out via email, Hannah, Hannah, at TruDiagnostic.com. TRU diagnostic is singular. Dr. Sweet said at the beginning, I have Everything Epigenetics, which right now is just a podcast platform to educate on this as well. So reach out to me there, contact form on my page, but would love to talk to anyone who has any questions.
Great. So we're going to take a break now. And after the break, we will talk about how do we implement, once we know this information, how do we implement and reverse age, and how does that work? And what interventions can we do? Because that's really what everybody wants to know, right? Okay, I got this information. How do I make this work for me so that I can live healthier, more vital life? So stay tuned, everyone, and we will discuss that on the next segment of the show. Thank you for listening so far on the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. And today we have the great pleasure of speaking with Hannah Wendt from TruDiagnostics. And we've been talking all about epigenetics, DNA methylation, aging, what all of that means. But now I really want to switch gears a little bit. We talked a lot of science, maybe even some words that people don't even understand, but that's okay. We're all learning, right? But the main thing I think people want to know is, okay, I go and get this test, I find out this information. Now what? What do I do? How do I make change? How do I affect this? So we didn't talk about it, but there is a pace of aging, right? So explain a little bit about the pace of aging, and then if that's a little faster than we want it to be, how do we affect that? Because that's the one we can really look at to affect, right?
Yeah. And I think you may have hinted at this earlier too. I'll also preface by saying all of these markers are changeable, but the Deneen pace is going to be what's available right now. That is the most precise and can be retested the most frequently, about every 2 to 3 months, 6 to 8 weeks. So this is my favorite one to talk about. It's called the Dunedin Pace, like Dr. Sweet said, named after Dunedin, New Zealand, a cohort study they did there. And what they did to create this algorithm is they actually took about 1,037 individuals from Dunedin that were born in 1972 and 1973. So that's just defined as a birth cohort. What's really unique about this study, though, is they are still following the same group today. They're 52 years old, and they have a 96% retention rate, which is mind-blowing. So yeah, for reference, for anyone listening, a good retention rate in the States is like 60% if you're lucky. So I'm telling you, this is a class A study right here. And what they did across their lifetime at 4 different points in particular, again, they just ran a 5th one. They took all of these biomarkers, this additional data, things like blood-based values as well, and they coagulated that to actually create this algorithm called Dunedin pace, or your pace of aging. And instead of a biological age, like an overarching biological age we've been discussing, this actually tells you how quickly you're aging biologically for every 1 chronological year. So it's like a speedometer, right? Think of it in that sense.
Looks kind of like that too when you get the report.
Yeah, I always end up doing, something with my arm like this, and talking with my hands. But basically, the range is from 0.6 to 1.4. So if you're at the highest at 1.4, you're aging 40% faster than you would be at that 1 mark. And if you were at 0.6, you're aging 40% slower. So again, it tells you how quickly you're aging biologically for every 1 chronological year. And Dr. Sweet, like you were alluding to, if we have a faster pace of aging, that may be a result of a ton of different lifestyle factors. And I would say the number one studied recommended therapy to slow down that Dunedin pace, it just got published in Nature about 4 to 5 months ago. It's going to be caloric restriction. So it's, the calorie randomized control trial is what it's defined as, but it is only, and I say only because they attempted 25% caloric restriction at the beginning, but it's only 10% caloric restriction in healthy non-obese adults. So very healthy population. And really the idea behind caloric restriction is that it works in animal models to extend lifespan and actually health span too, which is kind of crazy to think about. So we thought, wait a second, it's very unethical to perform caloric restriction on a human throughout their entire life. Why don't we take these age-related biomarkers and see if we can validate using this caloric restriction study? Because we know, again, caloric restriction works in animal models. And the only one and by one, I mean epigenetic clocks, the only biological age clock that was able to track that change was the Dunedin pace.
Mhm.
So it really proved that, again, Dunedin pace is the best to use for N of one personalized medicine. Because again, and this is something you hinted at earlier too, which I wish I would have expanded on. We have these interventional clinical trials and they do give us good guidelines and maybe things that we want to try, but our epigenetics is so unique to ourselves, to our
Yeah.
biological makeup, that
Yeah.
you have to do this testing to really figure out
Yeah.
how it's being changed.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like, I do testing myself, obviously. And so,
Hmm.
every time you get a test back, there's no two that are completely the same. Like,
Hmm.
yes, I'm looking at all the same kind of things every time, but how that is made up and how that presents in a person is so different. And even to the type you can have. So for example, I was talking about this with someone today, GAD1 gene, right? It can, if someone has that expressed and turned on, certain foods can make them anxious or give them brain
Mm.
fog and things like that. But there's such a variety of foods that are within that, and some can affect one person one way and affect another person. So it's really this information, you can be armed with all this information, but then, yeah, you've got to really customize it to you and your epigenetics, because it is different for everyone.
Yeah. You're
So
you're
yeah.
exactly right. Yeah, I encourage people to do yeah, just get a baseline if you're curious. We do offer a product that just tests the Dunedin pace and your telomere length too. So if you're like, I'm on the fence, I think it's cool, it sounds great, but you don't want to do all of the overarching biological ages and things we were talking about earlier, maybe just get, dip your toes in the water, just do that smaller kit. And I think it will make you very curious to what else is out there. And again, looking at this and taking this from more of an, hey, I really want to optimize. You want more of an optimal approach.
Right.
And you also said something earlier, you can't manage what you don't measure, something along those lines, which is what we say
Yeah.
here all the time, that famous quote by Peter Drucker. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned caloric restriction, and I think some people will be like, oh, I don't want to do that. What other interventions? I know that you give a guide when people do the report. So let's talk about sleep as being one.
Yeah.
I love sleep. I think sleep is one of the biggest things that can affect our health. How
Yeah.
does that, when you've looked at people's intervening with sleep and their pace of aging, how does that affect?
Yeah,
Like,
I would say heavily. I would say sleep's a little bit harder to
okay,
study or to have those interventional trials. There was a women's health initiative study they did that was fairly large, and what they really gained from that was that your quality sleep matters over quantity sleep. That was the
okay,
one takeaway. Again, I still think we need to have more trials on that be done, but basically the more insomnia related symptoms that you had, the
mhm,
worse your epigenetic aging is, and that makes
right,
sense. But
yeah,
they didn't find a very tight or statistically significant correlation with the number of hours you sleep, and we know that's obviously important for your health, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
um I think if I could put together some type of study involving sleep, it'd be definitely integrating wearable data, right? Like the
hmm,
Whoop or the Aura, just so you could get
yeah,
a better resolution with those epigenetic markers at the same time. So we'd be able to kind of see that correlation there. So although we know sleep is very important for health and your body, I would say yeah, we don't know much about it as it relates to epigenetics actually, but I would say you need quality and you need quantity. That's definitive.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the research has been a little moving on the amount. So it's anywhere at the moment, I think from 6.5 to 7.5 is kind of,
Hmm.
everybody's kind of saying, okay, it's somewhere in there that everybody needs. But I think you've also kind of said something that I think is also important, is the quality, because
Hmm.
you can be in bed and kind of snoozing and not getting that deep sleep, the REM sleep. And I think you can only know that from the wearable data. So you
Yeah.
have to look at that for sure.
Yeah.
And
Exactly right.
yeah, yeah. And then what about diet? I know people talk about the
Mhm.
Mediterranean diet as
Yeah.
being something that is great for longevity, olive oil and those kind of foods that are included in the Mediterranean fish, lots of high omega-3s. What about intervention with diet? How does that affect?
Yeah. Aside from caloric restriction, which I don't think you'd call that much of a diet, but the Mediterranean diet has been heavily studied and validated and looks really good, meaning it's going to shift your methylation markers in your favor, is what I like to call it, and help reverse those biological aging outcomes. We also see diets like the dietary approaches to stop hypertension. So again, more quality foods over quantity foods. That's basically a diet consisting of more whole grains, legumes, more fruits, more veggies, less red meat, less sugar sweetened beverages, less sodium as a general guideline. We're currently doing a study right now with the nutritarian diet, which again is more greens and beans and mushrooms, onions, I think, things like that. And then we more recently just did a study actually looking at I would say vegan versus omnivore diet that was controlled for every aspect. And weirdly enough, saw vegan being a lot better. It was just over 8 weeks. I think, again, long term, it still needs to be very much explored, but it was a twin study. And they controlled for everything. So they even had prepackaged meals, right? And they saw a lot of blood-based biomarkers get better for the vegan group as well. And that's going to actually be in a Netflix documentary series too, very shortly. But yeah, so I think, when you're thinking of food, just anything that's intuitive, right? That would be better for you. But again, looking more towards Mediterranean DASH diets, nutritarian diets, as far as that goes.
So the nutritarian, is that with Dr. Furman?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So super excited. I think we're under data analysis phase with that. So we don't have results for it yet. The hypothesis is it's going to be, really good. We think even maybe better than that DASH diet too.
So that's your G bombs, right? The green,
yes,
the beans.
I was trying to remember them in my head.
Thank you for listening so far on the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet. Thanks for listening to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet. Breathe, eat, sleep, thrive in every aspect of your life on transformationtalkradio.com. Tune in Thursdays at 6 p.m. to continue your new narrative and step into a new way of being. We are not what people have told us we are. We are so much more than that. I am going to help you thrive and get the answers you desire, not only in the external world, but on the inside. For more information, go to drrachelsweet.com. That's drrachelsweet.com.